February 1942, 06:10 a.m. Laverton Airfield, Australia. Cold air cuts across the tarmac. The smell of burnt metal hangs thick. A bomber stands on the tarmac that every pilot refuses to fly. Not because of enemy fighters waiting in the sky, not because the Japanese own the sky, because this aircraft should not exist. The fuselage belongs to one wreck, the tail section to another. Welded seams cut jagged lines across the aluminum skin. Rivets hold mismatched panels together. No manuals, no hope. The airframe creaks while standing still. Across the Pacific, Japanese forces advance unchecked. Singapore has fallen. The Philippines are collapsing. Every B-17 in the theater is either destroyed or damaged beyond recognition. They fall within weeks. Shot down, bombed, lost. This one is built from their corpses. A hand touches cold metal. Fingers trace the seam where two dead aircraft became one. Engineers calculated it would tear apart on takeoff, but command has no choice but to fly it anyway, because if scrap metal cannot survive, nothing else will. Do you trust scrap metal with your life? What happens when survival depends on what should have been left in pieces? December 7th, 1941, 8:02 a.m. Pearl Harbor burns. American air power in the Pacific dies in minutes. B-17 explode on runways before engines start. Hangars collapse into fire. Fuel depots detonate like volcanoes. The Japanese do not just attack, they erase. Within hours, the myth of American air superiority becomes smoke. At Clark Field in the Philippines, B-17D, serial number 40-3097, sits on the tarmac when the first wave arrives. Explosions march across concrete. Aircraft burst apart. Men run. Some do not make it. Crew Chief Frank Kurtz does not run. He climbs into the cockpit. No pre-flight, no checklist, no permission. Just ignition. Engines cough to life. Japanese bombs crater the runway 50 yards behind the tail. The bomber rolls, accelerates, lifts. The runway explodes where the wheels were 3 seconds earlier. 40-3097 escapes, barely. It flies south toward Del Monte Airfield, toward temporary safety that will not last. But the aircraft does not fly clean. Number 3. Engine trails black smoke. Hydraulic fluid streams from severed lines. Shrapnel has punched through the fuselage in 17 places. The tail section shudders. Control surfaces respond late. At Del Monte, mechanics swarm the bomber. What they find is a death sentence on wings. Tail section cracked through primary load-bearing members. Wing spars compromised at the root. Fuselage skin shredded. Stringers bent beyond tolerance. The inspection report is 3 words long. Scrap the aircraft. But there is nothing to scrap it for. No replacement parts exist. No supply ships arrive. The Japanese control the sea lanes. The Japanese control the air. By late December, the order comes down. Evacuate all remaining aircraft to Australia, including the ones that should not fly. 40-3097 launches again. Pilots white-knuckle the controls across 2,000 miles of open ocean. Every hour brings new failures. Oil pressure drops. Fuel consumption spikes. The tail vibrates so hard, the rear gunner vomits. It should fall into the Pacific. It does not. January 1942. The bomber lands at Laverton Airfield, Australia. Mechanics inspect it again. The damage is worse than reported. The tail section will separate on the next hard landing, guaranteed. The fuselage shows stress fractures at 8 frame stations. The wing root attachments have elongated bolt holes, metal fatigue that should ground the aircraft permanently. One mechanic puts it simply, "She's done." Command faces reality. No parts, no replacements, no hope of resupply for months, and the Japanese are still coming. Port Moresby will fall, Darwin will fall, Australia itself might fall. Every bomber matters, even dead ones. At the edge of the airfield, another B-17 lies crumpled, belly landing 2 weeks earlier. Fuselage destroyed, nose crushed, wings buckled. But the tail section is intact. Someone makes a decision that violates every engineering principle. Cut the tail off the wreck. Graft it onto 40-3097. 2 dead aircraft. 1 impossible gamble. Welders work through the night. Sparks shower onto oil-stained concrete. Metal screams under cutting torches. Rivets hammer into aluminum that was never designed to meet. Tolerances do not match. Frame stations do not align. Load pads do not connect properly. Engineers would call it structural suicide. Mechanics call it Tuesday. By dawn, the thing stands. Not an aircraft, a warning. Pilots walk the flight line at sunrise. They stop. They stare. The seams are visible from 50 yards. Mitchard panels, different shades of aluminum. Welds that cut across the fuselage like scars. No one speaks. Finally, a crew chief breaks the silence. Looks half swan, half goose. Someone laughs. The sound dies immediately. But the name sticks. The Swoos. A joke wrapped around terror. Because everyone knows what happens next. Someone has to fly it. How many missions can desperation survive before physics wins? March 1942. First mission after reconstruction. No one volunteers. The pilot assigned to the Swoos walks the pre-flight in silence. His hand shakes when he touches the fuselage. He can feel the seam, the place where 2 corpses were welded into one. Engines start. The airframe shudders violently. That is not normal. Pilots grip controls, knuckles white, waiting for something to tear free. Throttles advance. The bomber rolls, picks up speed. The grafted tail section vibrates so hard the rear gunner cannot focus his eyes. Rotation speed. The nose lifts. Wheels leave the ground. The tail does not separate. Not yet. Target: Japanese positions near Port Moresby. Altitude: 8,000 feet. The sky turns black with flak. Shrapnel rips through aluminum, punches new holes beside old ones. The tail shudders. Metal groans along the graft line. In the cockpit, pilots watch the instruments and wait. Wait for the crack. The snap. The moment physics wins. Bombs away. Turn for home. Fuel pressure drops. Number 2 engine loses oil. The aircraft shakes through turbulence like it is coming apart. Maybe it is. 200 miles of ocean. No alternates. No rescue. The Swoos makes it back. Barely. Mechanics count the damage. 53 new holes. Cracks in 3 stringers. The tail graft shows stress marks along the entire weld. Estimated missions remaining: 1. Maybe. The crew chief writes in the log, "Patch and pray." April 1942. The Swoos flies again and survives. May 1942. Again. June 1942. Again. Each time, mechanics expect the airframe to fail. Each time, it does not. New B-17s arrive from the States. Factory fresh. Perfect paint. Full gun turrets. Crews climb aboard with confidence. 3 weeks later, those aircraft are gone. Zeros over the Coral Sea. Flak over Rabaul. Engine failure over the Pacific where the water is 2 miles deep and rescue does not exist. The Swoos is still flying. Pilots start to notice quietly, carefully. The patchwork bomber survives what new aircraft cannot. No one says it out loud, but everyone knows. July 1942. Command makes a decision. The Swoos will not bomb anymore. Too valuable, too fragile, too inexplicably alive. Engineers strip the ball turret, remove waste guns, pull out bombardier equipment, cut weight everywhere possible. No turrets means no defense, but it also means speed. In 1942, speed is the only defense that matters. August 1942. General George Brett needs a command transport. Something fast, something reliable. He chooses the Swoos. Every officer in the Pacific thinks he is insane. Brett does not care. He flies it anyway. The aircraft now carries generals across hostile airspace, supplies to forward bases, intelligence between commands, wounded men out of combat zones. It flies at night, flies low, flies routes that do not exist in any manual. The Japanese own the sky. The Swoos flies through it anyway. September 1942. Routine inspection reveals new cracks. Wing root, critical structure. October 1942. More cracks, tail section, where the graft meets original metal. Every landing stresses the hybrid frame beyond any design limit. Metal fatigue is not theory. It is measured, quantified, inevitable. Mechanics weld, reinforce, splice, improvise. The aircraft flies again, always again. November 1942. Supply run to Port Moresby. A Zero drops out of the sun. The Swoos has no guns, cannot fight, cannot defend. The pilot shoves the throttles past redline, dives. The airframe screams, metal flexes, rivets strain. Engineers said this maneuver would tear the tail off. The tail stays on. The Zero cannot match the dive speed. The Swoos escapes. December 1942. Another crack, another repair, another mission. The pattern does not break. New crews rotate in. They hear the stories, the legend of the unkillable Frankenstein bomber. They do not believe. Then they fly it. Then they feel the airframe shudder on takeoff. Hear the metal groan in turbulence. See the cracks that maintenance cannot fully hide. Then they land, and the aircraft holds together one more time. Then they believe. By the end of 1942, the Swoos has flown more combat hours than any B-17 in the Pacific. Not because it is the best, because it will not die. Pilots stop joking about the name. Mechanics stop expecting failure. Something impossible is happening. Scrap metal is outliving engineering. Desperation is beating design. And no one understands why. Could something born from wreckage teach the military how to survive? January 1943. The question changes. Not, will the Swoos survive, but how? Engineers arrive with calipers and notebooks. They measure, calculate, test every assumption. The numbers do not make sense. Stress loads exceed maximum tolerance by 40%. Metal fatigue surpasses predicted failure point. The graft welds should have cracked catastrophically 6 months ago. But the aircraft keeps flying. Someone realizes the truth. The Swoos is not surviving despite being broken. It is surviving because it is broken. The hybrid frame flexes where factory aircraft crack. Weight reduction shifts load paths away from damaged structures. The tail graft distributes stress differently than original design. Desperation accidentally created something better. Mechanics begin documenting everything. Every weld, every reinforcement, every improvised fix that should not work but does. Survival becomes mathematics. Flight envelopes are rewritten specifically for the Swoos. Maximum speed reduced 15 knots. Maximum altitude reduced 2,000 feet. Turn radius increased to minimize G-forces on the grafted tail. These are not suggestions. They are the equation between mission success and structural failure. Pilots learn the limits, memorize them, respect them. Push too hard and the aircraft will kill you. Fly within the margins and it will bring you home every time. Command adapts missions to match the aircraft's capabilities. No more high-altitude bombing. No more combat formations. No more anything the airframe cannot tolerate. Instead, rapid transport, low-level reconnaissance, VIP movement, casualty evacuation. Missions where speed matters more than firepower, where survival matters more than specifications. The Swoos becomes a surgical instrument in a war fought with sledgehammers. Crews rotate every 6 weeks. The aircraft does not. New pilots climb aboard. They read the restrictions. Maximum speed, maximum altitude, prohibited maneuvers. They think it makes the bomber weak. Then, they fly through a thunderstorm at 6,000 feet. Watch the airframe flex, feel it bend and return. Survive turbulence that would snap a rigid structure. Then, they understand. Weakness is survival. Rigidity is death. Maintenance logs become case studies. Wing spar reinforcement using non-standard alloys, approved. Tail section re-riveting at half-inch interface, approved. Fuselage skin patches welded instead of riveted, approved. Engine mount modification to reduce vibration transfer, approved. Every procedure violates some regulation. Every procedure keeps the aircraft alive. By mid-1943, the Swoos has logged more flight hours than any B-17 in the theater. 1,200 hours, 1,500, 2,000. New B-17Gs arrive with chin turrets and upgraded armor. Factory perfect, combat ready. Crews board them with confidence. The aircraft last 4 weeks. Some fall to fighters, some to flak, some to mechanical failure over water where no one sees them die. The Swoos outlives every single one. Engineers stop calling it luck. They call it data. Lessons learned from the Swoos spread across the Pacific, then across every theater. Modular repair doctrine approved. Salvage first maintenance philosophy approved. Field modification authorization for non-standard solutions approved. What started as desperation becomes strategy. Bases in New Guinea begin cannibalizing wrecked aircraft. Mechanics splice airframes, weld mismatched parts. apply techniques learned from one impossible bomber. Hundreds of aircraft that should have been scrapped fly again. The swoosh becomes a table, not for perfection, for endurance. Late 1943, a new B-17G pilot arrives at the squadron, fresh from the States, trained on pristine aircraft with backup systems and redundancy. He sees the swoosh on the flight line, mismatched panels, visible welds, the scars of 2 years in combat. He asks his crew chief, "Why is that wreck still here?" The crew chief does not look up, because it refuses to die. The pilot laughs. The crew chief does not. "You'll fly her tomorrow. Then you'll understand." Tomorrow comes. The pilot walks the pre-flight, touches the fuselage, feels the seam where impossible meets impossible. Engines start. The airframe vibrates. Different than training, different than anything factory built. Alive in a way new aircraft are not. Takeoff, climb, level flight. The bomber does not fly smooth. It flies honest. Every stress, every limitation, every compromise between what should be and what is. The pilot lands 6 hours later. He does not laugh anymore. He writes in his log, "She's not pretty, but she's real." That becomes the unofficial motto. Not pretty, just real. And in a war where nothing is certain, real is enough. When perfection fails, can broken pieces rewrite the rules of survival? September 1944. The swoosh crosses the Pacific one final time. Orders come down. Transfer stateside. Albrook Field, Panama Canal Zone. General Brett still uses it as his personal transport, still trusts scrap metal more than factory new. The flight takes 3 days. Island hopping, refueling, nursing engines that have been running since Pearl Harbor. The bomber arrives at Albrook. What happens next should end the story. Inspection teams swarm the aircraft like surgeons around a dying patient. Calipers measure metal thickness. X-rays penetrate aluminum skin. Ultrasonic testing hunts for invisible cracks. Engineers crawl through every compartment with flashlights and growing horror. The tail graft shows microfractures along the entire weld line, not surface cracks, structural failures waiting to happen. The wing root attachments have elongated bolt holes. Metal fatigue beyond anything any B-17 should survive. The fuselage stringers show stress consistent with triple the expected service life. One engineer puts down his clipboard. He does not say anything. He does not need to. Reports stack on desks, pages and pages of technical language that all mean the same thing. This aircraft is dying. It has been dying for 3 years. It should have died 3 years ago. The recommendation reaches command in a single sentence. Immediate retirement, scrap for parts. Standard protocol, unavoidable, final. The swoosh flew from Pearl Harbor to the edge of victory, carried thousands of personnel safely, survived missions that killed newer, stronger aircraft. But physics always wins eventually. The reports sit on General Brett's desk for 2 days. He reads them. Every page, every measurement, every fracture analysis. Then he reads the flight logs. Over 60,000 miles in combat zones, December 1941 to September 1944. Nearly 3 full years of continuous operations. Not a single mission failure, not one. He picks up a pen, writes 4 words that defy every engineering standard, every safety regulation, every rational decision. Authorize emergency repairs, not retirement. Repairs. The order reaches the maintenance chief at Albrook. He reads it 3 times. Then he calls his crew together. They want us to fix it. Silence. Someone laughs, stops immediately. Fix what? It's held together by welds that shouldn't exist. The chief looks at the order again. Then we make more welds that shouldn't exist. The work begins that night. No manual covers this. No procedure exists. No training prepared anyone for what comes next. Welders cut away metal that has been flying for 3 years. Fabricators shape replacement pieces by hand. Riveters hammer new seams using techniques that were invented in Australian airfields and never written down. Engineers apply every lesson learned from 3 years of impossible survival. Splice. New aluminum into cracked spars. Reinforce fracture points with experimental alloys. Re-rivet entire sections at intervals. No factory would approve. The work takes 6 weeks, 16-hour days, sparks in the dark, metals screaming under stress. Measurements that do not match specifications. Inspectors return. They examine the welds, the splices, the reinforcements. Nothing matches regulation. Rivet spacing, non-standard. Weld penetration, inconsistent. Structural members, reinforced with techniques found in no manual. One inspector writes in his report, "This aircraft does not meet certification standards." Then he adds a second line, "But the welds are stronger than original." Stress testing begins. Engine run-ups at full power. The airframe holds. Control surface deflection tests. The tail graft holds. Simulated flight loads that would break a factory aircraft. The reinforcements hold. Everything holds. Not because it follows the rules, because it learned to break them correctly. The Swoos is cleared for flight in November 1944. The inspector signs the approval with the note, "Against my better judgment." But he signs. The aircraft that should have been scrapped in 1942 is authorized to fly in 1944. Not weaker, stronger. Mechanics stand on the tarmac as engines start. The sound is the same. The vibration is familiar. But something changed. The aircraft survived its own death sentence. Scrap metal became legend. And the war is almost over. One more flight waits, the final one. When the rules say die, what happens when you rewrite survival itself? December 1945. The war is over. Japan surrendered in August. Germany fell in May. The shooting stopped. The dying stopped. But one story has not ended. General Brett stands on the tarmac at Washington, D.C. Cold morning, clear sky. The kind of day that makes metal contract and old welds groan. He looks at the Swoos one final time as a flying aircraft. Mismatched panels catch the light. Scars from Pearl Harbor to Australia to Panama. 4 years of war written in aluminum and desperation. Final flight. Washington to Wright Field, Ohio, home of the Air Corps Engineering Division, where aircraft go to be studied, analyzed, remembered, or forgotten. Brett climbs the ladder. His hand touches the fuselage. The metal is cold, worn, imperfect. It has carried him across a war. Now, it will carry him across the end of one. In the cockpit, the pilot runs pre-flight checks. His hands move through procedures he has done 100 times. But this time is different. This time, everyone knows it is the last. Control surfaces, operational. Hydraulics, nominal. Fuel, full. Oil pressure, steady. 4 engines that have been running since December 1941. Rebuilt, repaired, refuse to quit. Brakes, release. Throttles, advance. The bomber rolls forward. Weight transfers to the landing gear. Tires that have touched runways from Clarker Field to Laverton to Albrook. Speed builds. 40 knots, 50, 60. The tail lifts. The grafted tail section. The one welded in darkness by mechanics who had no manual and no hope. It lifts clean. 70 knots, 80, 90. Rotation speed. The pilot pulls back on the yoke. The nose rises. 100 knots. Wheels leave concrete. The moment of maximum stress. The moment every engineer said would end in catastrophic failure. The swoosh climbs into December sky. The tail does not separate. The wings do not buckle. The fuselage does not crack along the seams where two corpses became one. It just flies, like it always has. Altitude increases. 1,000 feet, 2,000, 5,000. The aircraft levels at 10,000 feet. Engines settle into cruise power. Smooth, steady. The sound of survival. Below, the American landscape scrolls past. Farmland, rivers, towns that sent their sons to war and got some of them back. The sky is empty. No flak, no fighters, no Zeros diving out of the sun with guns blazing. No threat except time and distance. Hours pass. The cockpit is quiet, just engine noise, just the vibration that has become familiar. Brett sits in silence. He remembers the first time he flew this aircraft, early 1943, Port Moresby. Japanese fighters owned the sky, and this patchwork bomber was all that stood between command and collapse. He remembers thinking it would not last a month. It lasted the entire war. Ohio appears on the horizon. Right field. The pilot begins descent. Altitude bleeds off. 10,000 feet. 8,000. 5,000. Gear extends. Hydraulics whine. Wheels lock into position. Flaps deploy. The airframe adjusts. Load shifts across structures that have carried weight for 4 years. 3,000 feet. 2,000. 1,000. The runway fills the windscreen. 500 feet. The pilot eases back on the throttles. Airspeed decreases. The bomber sinks toward concrete. 300 feet. Everyone in the cockpit knows what is about to happen. The final landing. The last time these wheels will touch ground under power. 200 feet. 100 feet. The runway rises. 50 feet. The pilot flares. Nose up. Speed bleeds off. 20 feet. 10 feet. Wheels touch. Contact. Rubber meets concrete. The landing gear compresses. The airframe flexes. Metal absorbs the impact along every seam, every weld, every rivet driven by hand in desperate air flicks across the Pacific. Main gear down. Weight transfers. Nose gear touches. Full contact. Brakes engage. The bomber decelerates. 70 knots. 60. 50. Metal shudders. The tail vibrates. Wing spars flex one final time. 40 knots. 30. 20. The swoosh rolls to a stop. Engines shut down. Propellers slow. Spin. Stop. Silence. No explosion, no structural collapse, no catastrophic failure. Just silence. The kind that feels like respect. Brett sits in the cockpit, does not move, does not speak. Outside, mechanics approach slowly. They stop 20 feet away. They do not rush forward, they do not cheer. They just stand, watching, because they understand what just happened. An aircraft that should have died in December 1941 just completed its final mission in December 1945. 4 years, 60,000 miles, thousands of lives carried safely. Built from wreckage, welded by desperation, flown by people who had no choice but to trust it. And it never failed. Not once. Brett climbs down the ladder. His boots touch the tarmac. He turns, looks at the bomber. Scars everywhere. Mismetal. Welds that cut across the fuselage like surgical scars on a survivor. It does not look like victory. It looks like refusal. The refusal to break. The refusal to quit. The refusal to accept that scrap metal cannot become immortal. He places his hand on the fuselage one last time. The metal is still warm from flight, imperfect, worn, alive. Someone behind him speaks quietly. She made it. Brett does not turn around. She always did. The sun sets over right field. The swoosh stands silent. Its war is over. What defines an aircraft? The factory that built it, or the mechanics who refused to let it die? The swoosh lives. While hundreds of B-17s burn over Europe, crash into the Pacific, or rot in scrapyards, this one survives. The only B-17 to serve from the war's first gunfire on December 7, 1941, to its last breath in August 1945. 4 years of continuous war, 1,461 days. Every other B-17 in the Pacific fell, burned, or disappeared into the ocean. This one refused. In 1946, the official paperwork arrives. Retirement from active service. Not destruction, preservation. The aircraft that pilots refused to board in February 1942 becomes the aircraft the Air Force refuses to forget. But survival is not simple. For years, the swoosh moves between storage facilities, museums, display hangars, changing hands like a relic no one knows how to honor properly. It sits outside. Weather erodes the welds. Corrosion attacks the mitred seams. The tailgraft, welded in darkness by desperate hands, begins to separate again. Not from combat, from neglect. Veterans who flew it hear the news. Mechanics who rebuilt it write letters. Crews who trusted it with their lives demand action. General Brett's family intervenes. His daughter, actress Andrea King, becomes the aircraft's guardian. She fights bureaucracy, raises awareness, refuses to let the bomber that saved her father die in a parking lot. Slowly, painfully, the swoosh is moved to proper preservation. First to the Smithsonian, later to the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Restoration begins, not to factory condition, to truth. Preservationists face a choice. They could strip the pyramid panels, remove the field welds, make it look like it rolled off the assembly line. Perfect. Fake. They choose different. They preserve the scars. Every weld stays visible. Every mismit panel remains. The tail graft, the impossible seam that should have killed everyone aboard, is protected as the most important feature, because that seam is the story. The evidence that survival does not require perfection. Today, the swoosh stands in the museum. Visitors walk past gleaming B-17s with perfect paint, factory restorations, pristine frames that look like they never saw combat. Then, they see it. Different. Panels that do not match. welds cutting across the fuselage, rivets at non-standard interruptions. The physical evidence of desperation turned into doctrine. Children ask their fathers, "Why does that one look broken?" Fathers read the placard. Then they understand. It is not broken. It is honest. Veterans stand in front of it longer than the others. They do not speak. They do not need to. They see what civilians cannot. The aircraft that proved broken things could be stronger than new ones, that mechanics mattered more than engineers, that survival was a choice, not a specification. Crews who flew the SWOOS hold reunions until they cannot anymore. They tell stories, not about heroism, about trust. Trust in welds made by flashlight. Trust in mechanics who rewrote rules. Trust in an aircraft that had every reason to fail and no reason to survive. One pilot, decades after the war, writes in his memoir, "I flew brand new B-17, factory perfect. They killed my friends. I flew the SWOOS, held together by spit and prayers. It brought me home every time. I learned something about strength that day. Real strength does not come from being unbroken. It comes from refusing to stay broken." The last mechanic who worked on the SWOOS dies in 1989. His family donates his tools to the museum. Among them, a welding torch, worn, used, the one he carried from Australia to Panama. The placard reads, "Used to repair B-17D, the SWOOS, under combat conditions 1942 to 1944. It sits in a display case near the aircraft, a tool that saved lives by breaking rules. The SWOOS does not shine under museum lights. It endures under them. A permanent reminder, not of what war built, but of what war could not destroy. When everything is designed to break, what makes one thing refuse?" The SWOOS rewrites assumptions about aircraft maintenance and operational philosophy. Before 1942, military aircraft design emphasized perfection, precision manufacturing, exact tolerances, ideal operating conditions. The SWOOS proved something else. Improvisation could equal or surpass factory precision under combat conditions. Modular repair became standard doctrine across all theaters. Field modification techniques developed on the SWOOS were codified into official maintenance procedures. Salvage operations saved hundreds of aircraft that would have been scrapped under pre-war protocols. Engineers learned from welders. Generals learned from mechanics. The concept that broken machines could be rebuilt stronger than original became foundational to post-war military engineering philosophy. Lessons from the SWOOS influenced aircraft battle damage repair procedures, modular component replacement systems, field modification authorization protocols, service life extension programs, material fatigue analysis under non-ideal conditions. The aircraft demonstrated that operational effectiveness could emerge from imperfection, that survival sometimes mattered more than specifications, that the ability to adapt exceeded the value of flawless design. These lessons extended beyond aviation. Military logistics adopted salvage-first mentalities. Engineering schools taught case studies on the SWOOS. Maintenance manuals incorporated field-proven techniques over factory recommendations. Today, the lessons endure. Every aircraft carrier has salvage teams trained in field modification. Every forward operating base has mechanics authorized to improvise. Every maintenance manual has a section on non-standard repairs. Because one patchwork bomber in 1942 proved something the military did not want to believe. Perfection is not strength. Adaptability is. The SWOOS never fired the shot that won a battle. never dropped the bomb that turned a campaign, never flew the mission that changed history. It did something harder. It survived long enough to teach survival. And that lesson saved more lives than any weapon. Veterans who never flew the SWOOS still know the name. Mechanics who never touched it still know the story. Because it represents something deeper than one aircraft. It represents the moment war learned humility. The moment doctrine bowed to reality. The moment the system admitted that the people in the field, covered in grease, holding welding torches, making decisions in the dark, knew something headquarters did not. That broken things in the right hands become unbreakable. The SWOOS stands in the museum. Visitors take photos. Most see an old airplane with mineral parts. Some see more. They see the birth of modern military logistics. They see the proof that rules exist to be rewritten when lives are at stake. They see evidence that the best solutions are not always designed. Sometimes they are welded together at 2 a.m. by people who refuse to quit. One placard near the aircraft reads, "The SWOOS proved that survival is not about avoiding damage. It is about refusing to let damage be final." Beneath it, a quote from a wartime mechanic. "We did not save the aircraft saved us. It taught us that nothing is unfixable if you care enough to try." The legacy is not metal, it is philosophy, and it is still flying. What happens when the lesson outlives the teacher? History remembers perfection. Gleaming aircraft photographed in formation. Flawless victories frozen in propaganda posters. Heroic moments captured in carefully composed images. But war does not survive on perfection. It survives on what is broken and refuses to fall. The SWOOS was never the fastest bomber, never the strongest, never the most heavily armed. It was never supposed to matter. Two wrecked aircraft welded together by mechanics who had no other choice. Flown by crews who trusted scrap metal because they had nothing else to trust. And, in that trust, something unexpected emerged. Not invincibility, endurance. The kind that does not come from design specifications or factory tolerances, but from the refusal to accept impossibility. From mechanics who rewrote rules when the rule book failed. From pilots who flew airframes that manuals said should not exist. From a chain of decisions that chose survival over surrender. The SWOOS flew from Pearl Harbor to VJ Day. 4 years, 60,000 miles, thousands of lives carried safely, not because it was perfect, because it refused to break. In a world that worships the new, the flawless, the untested, maybe that matters more. Maybe the greatest victories are not measured in miles flown or enemies destroyed. Maybe they are measured in the quiet refusal to quit, in the decision to weld one more seam, fly one more mission, trust one more time. The SWOOS does not shine, it endures. And in that endurance lives a lesson worth remembering. Sometimes survival is the victory. If you found meaning in this story of refusal and resilience, share it with those who need to hear it. Because the greatest legacies are not built from perfection, but from the courage to keep flying when everything says you should fall.